My name is John Silvester. I'm a reporter with the Age newspaper. Some people call me Sly of the Underworld. There are 5 million crime stories in the naked city, and this is one of them. And a warning, this episode discusses suicide. If the content raises any issues for you, you can call Lifeline on 131114 and reach out to a friend. In police circles, Tim Peck was a star. A born crook catcher who worked homicide, revelled in the crushing hours and always put the job first. Sure, there were warning signs. 5 years earlier, full of booze, after attending a colleague's farewell, he stacked a car and ran off. He didn't lose his licence, but escaped with a fine. Back then, policing was exclusively a result business, and as long as you did your bit, just about anything could be forgiven. He adhered to the 3 unspoken rules of policing. Don't go sick on night shift, don't lose a fight, and don't lag on your mates.
Then when I started having nightmares or flashbacks, I really trained myself not to sleep, so I wouldn't have to have that.
Then in October 2014, there was the collision that cost him his job, but probably saved his life.
If it made it look like the hard-working detective stacked his car, no one would have to know about my mental health issues or the drinking or anything else.
He couldn't see a future outside policing, but when that was taken from him, he found a pathway by helping others.
Wife was at work, kids were at school, and I had to walk to my psychologist. It was about 6 k's because I was too scared to drive.
Suicidal, suspended from the police force and in danger of losing his family, he put forward the reasons he should kill himself to his psychologist.
He said, "It's a great theory, Tim, but you've got one flaw." And he said, "Well, you don't get to choose how other people feel."
He also encouraged Peck to write a journal to aid his recovery. It's now been published in a raw and riveting book, The Invisible Obvious, which should be read by all emergency service workers at risk of work-related stress. This is Tim's story. So, Tim, where were you brought up?
Grew up in country Victoria in a place called Kerrang, up near Swan Hill in northern Victoria. One of 12 children. Mum and Dad both lived in town, obviously. We weren't a farming family. We just lived in town and played a lot of sport and very involved in community. Played footy at Kerrang and some more successfully than me, John.
So why did you join the job?
There was a chap I was working with at a steel company out in West Heidelberg. I sat in the office with him and he told me that he was joining the police force, and I'd never really given any thought to much of a career. I'd done a little bit of study. I did a couple of years of a primary teaching degree and soon worked out that wasn't for me. Was done a bit of builder's labouring and now I was doing this job, had no real aspirations, and started thinking about it and thought, well, that might be something for me. There was no family history. There was no great friends that were in the job. It was just something that I thought I'd have a crack at.
So you get in 1994.
Yep.
Obviously you go the traditional route. So you're a trainee. I imagine you worked on the van and that sort of stuff. What drew you towards being a detective?
Yeah, I think my first station was actually Russell Street before it shut. We were there for, I think, only 6 or 8 months before we moved to the World Trade Centre. And the Russell Street used to have what was called the bull ring of detectives. And being a country lad who didn't mind a beer and had been around footy clubs for a fair while, they looked like a pretty likeable sort of group of people to be around. And I was, even at that early stage, fairly fascinated by crime for whatever reason. And I just gravitated to it right from the start, I'd say. That was really my focus.
So we'd call it old school, so work hard, play hard?
Absolutely, yeah.
8 or 9 years in the job and you're at Homicide.
Yeah.
Now, we know Homicide, when the whips are cracking, you've got to be able to do the 16, 18, 20-hour days.
Yep.
Did that suit you?
Suited me more than my wife. It suited me because I love the work, and I guess it was part of that culture that I had a sort of an unwritten rule that I needed to know more about any investigation than anyone else. So the more I could memorise, understand, fill gaps, make links that others couldn't, that's where so I read a lot. I knew a lot about a lot. But even at that early stage, neglecting probably some of the more important things. I had a wife, 3 kids by then, wasn't at home very often, drinking a fair bit, but still going okay mentally, I'd say. I was still functioning really well at a high level.
Yeah, but that's the trap, isn't it? That as long as you're functioning,
That's it.
You know, if you can work through the hangover or work through the lack of sleep, you say you're functioning. But were you functioning at home?
No. Oh, well, look, it's a really hard one to describe because I think there were times when I was at home and I was engaged and so on. It's not as if there was a flick switched where all of a sudden I was a bad dad or something like that. It was gradually over time. I know my mood changed. I know I'd have spent, I reckon there was weekends I'd spend at home where I didn't talk for a whole weekend towards when I got to the end. But work was invigorating. I really enjoyed work. It was fascinating doing that work. So it's sort of that values point where what's more important than solving a homicide and where does family fit into that? So it's a really delicate balance to get. But yeah, I didn't get it right.
You hit a bit of a hurdle with the car, yeah?
Hit a couple. While I was at Carlton, I crashed my own car with one of my colleagues after a send-off, left the scene, got done for fail to remain and so on. Yeah, I had to go to court and got a fine and discipline hearing. Now, back in the day, that was back 99. If that had been now, would have been straight out.
You would have been sacked, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But back then, it was a bit of a different culture and I was a worker and well-liked and the station was really supportive in a way. It wasn't as if it was a great punishment.
In fact, no one talked about it.
No, it was just like a mishap. Yeah.
Yeah, well, success covers the cracks, doesn't it?
It does. And sort of coming out of that culture too, like where drink driving it wasn't accepted, but it wasn't like it is now. I did have another incident where I blew 0.07 after work one night, not thinking I was over. I was under 0.07 because I didn't lose my licence, and that was 10 demerit points or whatever it was. And that one shook me up a bit. That was before I got there because I thought I'd blown my chance to get to homicide. And that was probably the first time I started to think about this drinking thing and why am I behaving the way I'm behaving and where's family fitting into this. So that was the first sort of warning sign, I think, that things weren't quite right.
So the homicide culture, which is accepted,
yes,
which you work until the job's done.
Absolutely.
You move into places where work-life balance matters and you go, no, it doesn't really.
No. Yeah, took that same culture. And on reflection, probably similar to what happened when I was at Carlton, where no criticism of the sergeants, but they came with that culture that was ingrained in me then, that you do the job, you get that done first, and then we celebrate, then you look after your family. So it sort of just rolled on, and that's the way I was trained, so that's the way I perceive the world. All reinforced in homicide. How am I going to manage? Exactly how I've been managed.
Yeah.
That's how
there's still remains of that now because older coppers are bewildered about younger coppers who don't. Who say, well, no, I am going home or I am requesting these days off. And they go, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real conflict for that change of sort of culture and generation.
But the job did get on top of you at different times. You've told me that, for example, sleep became very problematic.
My sleep's been terrible for a long time. And I think at homicide, because I had that penchant for wanting to know everything, if I wasn't at work, I was thinking about work or I was reading about work. I was always looking for an opportunity and nearly trained myself, to go that extra yard all the time. But then when I started having, nightmares or flashbacks and I didn't know what they were. I just thought everyone experienced trauma the way I did, that I thought, I'd be thinking about an incident that occurred that would wake me up and, horrible feeling, like you don't know what's going on. And I really trained myself not to sleep so I wouldn't have to have that. So the less time I'm in bed, the less chance there is that I'll be interrupted with a nightmare or whatever.
And what were the nightmares?
There was a couple of jobs I did at Mill Park, actually. There was one involving kids and bikies that was really messy and really challenging and lots of threats against me personally and the families and probably one of the worst child abuse cases you've had. And from a physical perspective, not a sexual perspective, this was actually just belting kids. And I had kids of that age at that time. And that was really hard to make that distinction between work and home life. And that one, for whatever reason, didn't worry me at the time, but would come back. There was another one that was quite a famous case where the person I'd charged committed suicide and he was going to be charged with murder. And on the suicide note, he squarely blamed me for his suicide, that I'd done all these things to set him up and that I was the cause of his death. And at the time, I didn't give a shit. I thought, I'm right and you're wrong. I've done my job. I look back that now or in later years and thought, is that really who I wanted to be? You know, that's it wasn't a great feeling.
What was the case?
It was actually the Maria Corp case. So I was informant for that one.
Yesterday, she was found unconscious, tied up and severely dehydrated.
Yeah, so the Maria Corp case received a lot of media attention. It became known as the body in the boot.
Body in the boot
Clinging
case.
to life in the boot of her car.
Maria was married to her husband, Joe, who was having an affair with a female called Tanya Herman. Tanya and Joe devised a plan for the future for them was to live together, and that included getting rid of Maria. So Tanya laid a wait in the garage for Maria to come down to a car. Tanya strangled her, put Maria in the boot, and then drove the car over to the Shrine of Remembrance. That car was missing for 3 days. If I had looked out the window on the 9th floor of 412 St Kilda Road, probably could have seen it, but not a great detective. We found the body in the back of the car and she was still breathing, much to our surprise. Like the car, for all intents and purposes, it smelt and it was fogged up and everything.
The good news came through that, we found my wife, and all I wanted to do was go see her, and I couldn't get there. I've been in a living nightmare for 4 days, hardly eaten, hardly slept, and, my whole family's like that. They have said that I could be a suspect, yes.
So we went out and arrested Joe. The investigation continued, and Tanya Herman actually provided a statement to say that she was involved and implicated Joe.
He told me, he said, I want her strangled. He said, I want her dead. I would have done anything for him.
Herman is now in jail for at least 9 years for Maria's attempted murder, having pleaded guilty.
It then went through a long process because Joe was the next of kin and was refusing to turn the medical treatment off. We had to get an independent medical advice to come in and say that it was more humane to end her life. She was on a peg tube and breathing tube. She was in a vegetative state. So they turned it off after Maria passed away and they had her funeral. We'd been through the committal and Joe was committed to stand trial, and he killed himself that week because he knew we were going to come with a murder charge because she'd passed away. It was an attempted murder up until that stage.
Joe Corp was found inside the shed with photographs of his wife Maria, including one from their wedding day, and diary entries which said he was innocent of any crime.
I sort of think about some of these things as, you played footy. It's a mental corky and it can take so long to come out. There was a reporter, Tom Pryor, and he covered the hanging of Ronald Ryan, and he told me it was that exciting. But he said, and when he was an older man, he said if he got drunk or he was particularly tired, he'd close his eyes and he could see Ryan's feet after he'd been hanged.
Yep.
But at the time, it didn't worry him at all.
Yeah. So that was exactly the case for me with that one. Like at the time, I thought I dealt with it. It was another case. It's resolved. Beauty. I don't have to go to trial. That was the relief I felt. But then as time went on, I think my position sort of changed. And is that the person I wanted to be that could be so sort of cold and callous that was just my job, and that's what happens in my job.
So you were drinking heavily?
At Homicide, probably not so much. I was at Missing Persons, and then Mr. Overland decided that we didn't need the Missing Persons unit anymore, and I was seconded across, or went across to Ron's crew, Ron Eddle's crew. Ron is a detective senior sergeant, long-time detective senior sergeant in the Homicide Squad, one of the group of the famous five. He was there for 25 years, I think it was. Multiple hundreds of homicides he investigated. Ended up being the secretary of the Police Association, so I worked with him there as well. He was a great mentor and friend to me. Easily the best investigator insofar as being able to have somebody tell him a story and building trust. Fascinating to watch him work and do that with whether that be victims or suspects or offenders or whoever that might be. Ron wasn't a big drinker, and he kept a pretty close rein on his crew. We all worked really hard and got along well, and it was a good environment. I still drank, with the boys when I could, but job was first then. Towards the end of my time, I think Ron had gone off seconded somewhere, and we had different senior sergeants come in, and that discipline for me, and not criticism of the other bosses, for me, dropped away without him there. That sort of accountability to him was really important to me. Yeah, I wanted to be the next Ron. That was my whole aim. So when he wasn't there, my discipline certainly dropped off, and that's when the drinking started, work performance to drop off, frustration. Yeah, not a great person to be around.
You moved, and at one point you're in charge of human sources?
So after I left Homicide, I went to Santiago. Santiago Task Force was set up in 2008, I reckon, about 2008, 2009, something like that.
And they were looking at?
There was 14 unsolved non-fatal shootings in the northern suburbs. It was the Hadaras and the Kikirs, Middle Eastern organised crime.
Sort of what we're seeing now.
Yeah, so they were two families warring, quite under-resourced out there. They'd had a little pilot project trying to look after it, and they were getting smashed. So they took one from each crew at Homicide, some from armed crime, and formed a task force, and away we went. I was gutted when Ron must have been back then, because he told me that it was my turn to go, and it was. We took turns in who had to go to the secondments. And I remember having a conversation with him where, I can't remember his stats, but it's, 300 homicides with a 90% solve rate or whatever it is. And here's me saying, how are you going to solve anything without me here? Just a few steps ahead of myself, John. And in reality, I think what he wanted to say was that you're tired, your work performance isn't what it was, you don't look well, you're overweight, you need a break. But they're not the conversations we had. And that's, again, no criticism. That was the culture. Move them somewhere else. Give him a break. He'll be back. And so I went off and sulked for 3 months and then got back into the work and straight back into where I was. But again, didn't have that discipline of Homicide. So the drinking became quite heavy again. Again, the sleeping was always an issue. 3 hours a night was probably about what I survived on most of the time. But you were going
to the police gym at 4 a.m?
At times, yeah, I'd be down to Heidelberg and into the gym there and sit around and look at the weights and wonder why I wasn't getting fit. It was rather unique. So I was at Santiago for a while. I got promoted as a uniform sergeant out to Moonee Ponds. I only stayed there 12 weeks in uniform before I got a role at Faulkner as the human source liaison officer. So I'd done a lot of the human source training up to the level 4 course, which was the highest level you could get.
So these are your secret informers?
Yes. And because I had such good connections through that Santiago work, it was a really simple job for me. So I had lots of connections. I was pretty much working by myself. I just get other people in to help me. And on reflection, if you were going to have a career break, that was it. No one really knew what my output was going to be. It wasn't hard work to get the information I needed to get. I could have spent a whole lot more time at home and got my drinking under control and looked after my mental health and sleep, but I didn't. I just continued doing what I was doing.
Then the big hurdle.
Then I went to, and the only reason I give you this background, I went to Banyule CI. I got promoted as a detective sergeant. I was there for 2.5 years, or maybe not even that, maybe 2 years. That was when I would say that culture of me being if you can't work if you're not as smart as me, you can't work as fast as me. If you don't want to work the hours that I do, if you don't drink as much as me, I'll find someone else who will. And these are, good people who had families and working at a suburban CI who had other priorities that if they didn't fit mine, bad luck, I'll find someone who does. So you sort of create this 2-tiered office, which is all of my doing. And
So you had your favourites.
Absolutely. And, my way I'd been brought up, you get the best and brightest and you teach them well. That's it. There wasn't a lot of focus on bringing up those that mightn't have been as skilled or dedicated or, they might have been as good, but they didn't have that same want to sacrifice as much as I did. So not saying I was any better than anyone else. I was probably better at sacrificing more. So that was, again, by that stage I was experimenting with getting off the drink, but getting back on it regularly, and the binges were getting worse. And it was there that I got an opportunity to go back into the source unit, human source management unit, as a detective senior sergeant. So in effect, I'd gone from a detective senior connie to a detective senior sergeant in about 3 and a bit years, which is a pretty fast promotion. So from the outside, looking in, this bloke's flying. He's on top of his game. He's got everything going. He knows what he's doing. Internally, I was done. I was alcoholic. I was having significant trouble understanding what mental health was all about. All I'd ever been taught was to tell no one and keep it in. I did see a counsellor and just lied my ass off. Went to see him about my drinking and didn't tell him anything about what was going on. Thought that the way I reacted was sleep and so on was just what everyone did. So it was like there was something wrong with me particularly that I was reacting this way, so I just need to suck it up and keep going and it'll work out. That was the plan.
So you literally crashed?
Yeah, so I got to Human Source Unit. I was there about 6 months. I got to March of 2014. I knew that I couldn't keep doing what I was doing. The family life was really difficult. I was drinking really heavily. I wasn't sleeping at all. The intrusive thoughts and nightmares, that I couldn't get rid of them with the drink anymore. So that was really troubling. So I really had no sleep most of the time.
And you told your wife that you wouldn't make Christmas?
Yeah, in August of that year. Yeah, I told her I wouldn't make Christmas. And it's really hard to explain, but in my mind, in my investigator's mind, that was a solution.
Yeah.
That if I could, if I took my own life and made it look like the hardworking detective stacked his car, no one would have to know about my mental health issues or the drinking or anything else. You'd be celebrated as a high-achieving detective. Family would be all right financially. Wife would be all right. Mum and Dad wouldn't have to know all the battles I'd been through, all those sorts of things. And I wouldn't embarrass the workplace, which was another really key thing. So 2nd of October, 2014, 3 o'clock in the morning, I crashed a covert police car into a parked truck in Grange Road in Fairfield. Off my face. Courage wasn't always my strong point, John. When they reenacted it, I was going 22 k's an hour. But it did tip the car up on its side and I couldn't get out. If I had, I would have done a runner for sure, no doubt. The members of the public come and grab me, made sure I stayed there. The coppers come up and they were trying to do everything they could to help me.
Do you know whether it was a drunken accident or an attempt on your life?
It was certainly my plan, and I was very pissed. Now, I don't consciously remember making that decision at that time, and I'm not sure that's whether I was so pissed, but after it happened, I was absolutely sure what the next step was. I told the police members there that I refused a breath test so they couldn't arrest me. If they want to have a rest, have a crack under the Mental Health Act and say, here you go, but I'm going to go and kill myself.
We'll be right back after the break.
So I sent some text messages off to different managers and family and said, that's it. I've been tracking people on mobile phones for 15 years. Took the battery out, took the SIM card out. They weren't going to find me. And off I went. Got a taxi into the town and come into Southern Cross here, and first train was to Warrnambool. So Warrnambool it was.
So that's why it was Warrnambool, because it was the first train. The first train to be in Ballarat.
Yeah. I didn't want to do anything in Melbourne. I didn't want anyone to find me here. So if first train had been Ballarat, Gippsland, wherever. But Warrnambool was where the train was going. I didn't really know anyone down that way, or at least I thought. Jumped on the train and, if you had sat on the train with me, I would have convinced you that suicide was the right answer. That's how sure I was in my own mind. I remember, I don't know what the people on the train were thinking. I was covered in blood, ripped shirt and whatever else. And I remember walking up and down the aisle just talking to myself the whole time. So I'm not sure what they were thinking whilst I was on the train, but I got off at Geelong for a while and walked around and got back on. But yeah, it was nearly like I was just going off to do another operation, another police operation. That I knew what the task was, I knew how to do it, compartmentalise that in my mind about what had to happen. And the rule I'd given myself was don't think about family. So as soon as that popped up, I'd go back into an operational mode because I knew if I thought about them, that would change the decision.
If you're walking up and down the train, I hope it wasn't first class. I'd want my money back.
Yeah, I don't know what class I was in, but yeah, should have been in cattle class. That's where I should have been.
So you get to Warrnambool?
Get to Warrnambool, and it was about 9 o'clock in the morning when I lobbed there. I had a really clear plan about what I was going to do. We just started recording human source engagements on mobile phones for the first time. We used to always use the micros. And in my warped mind, I thought I'm going to record my suicide note on my phone to see if the investigators were smart enough to find it. That's what I was thinking. So I went to a pub and banged on the door and they let me in. I needed another beer. And I asked him to plug the phone in to make sure it had power. And as soon as it had power, people were coming in. It was less than 10 minutes. There was somebody there of that phone getting power. And I knew one of them. I'd done some work down there and he'd helped out. And he walked in and I'm thinking to myself, if I've been in the wrong... Well, if they're on the piss down here at 9:30 in the morning, have I been working in the wrong place the whole time? But no, they weren't on the piss. They were there to grab me. Yeah. Ron actually came down and picked me up, spent the night with me and took me back. It was a really difficult period, as in when I went home, wife was at work, kids were at school, and I had to walk to my psychologist. And the amount of times I thought about finishing it along that walk was about 6 Ks because I was too scared to drive. When I met with him, one of the things that stuck out to me, I gave him the reasons. For the first time, I'd been seeing him and talking, just lying to him the whole way through, playing games with him and who could be silent the longest and all this sort of rubbish. And I gave him the reasons why. That wife would be better off, kids would be better off, work won't have to know, blah, blah, blah. And he said, it's a great theory, Tim, but you've got one flaw, and I don't like being told I'm wrong at the best of times. I said, well, if you can point it out, good luck to you. And he said, well, you don't get to choose how other people feel. What do you mean by that? We said, before you do anything, ask your wife what she thinks. You've told me that she'll be better off. What does she reckon? And ask your kids. So that was my first task, was to go home and ask them. And obviously that changed the way I looked at things. But I was still thinking about suicide 7-8 months later, just as a get-out clause. If things don't work out, I've got a plan to get out.
So did you do that? Did you go to your wife and kids? And
Probably not as bluntly as that, but it certainly changed a lot. Like, I haven't had a drink since that day. That was my first thing, was to get off the drink. My wife was super supportive, as were the kids. A really difficult time, but I think they knew that I was unwell more than it wasn't me just being a prick. They knew that there was other reasons why I was behaving the way I was behaving. And that's sort of part of it. Rebuilding that family was really hard. Trust is hard to win when you've been lying for so long. So in my mind, I think, well, I've told them not drinking again. What's wrong with them? Why don't they believe me? Because you've told them 30 times before and done it. So building that trust again is just an everyday thing. You just got to do what you need to do every day to build that up and get to a point where hopefully, it crosses over the line. So yeah, it didn't stop me thinking about it, but that's for sure. And a lot of treatment, a lot of self-reflection and work to try and get well again.
so you were charged?
I didn't get charged until, so that happened on 2nd of October. I think I got a summons in maybe March of the next year, something like that.
What were the legal consequences?
I got charged with refused breath test and careless driving or whatever it was. Went to court as soon as I could. So as soon as I got it, I booked in the first court date and pleaded guilty and got it out of the way. Lost my licence for 2 years and a fine, and fortunately without conviction. And then I was sort of in limbo. I was suspended with pay, but I went another 6 months without hearing from anyone. So I was just at home thinking about what am I going to do next. And it was pretty clear policing wasn't going to be my future. Apparently 3 drink drives isn't a great look.
Why didn't you resign?
I was getting paid.
Okay, that's a good
Well, I think that was probably the main thing. And I'd also, my psychologist as part of, because I had a head just full of police information. That's all I had was just, and everywhere I went and everywhere I looked, there was another area to get a surveillance team in, or a source I can meet, or I've done this there, I've done that there. So he sort of started thinking about how can we shift your thinking, and went through about, what would my next, if I was to have another career, what would that look like?
How old were you?
47.
Okay, so
at the
you've
time.
got
Yeah.
a lifetime.
So we decided on a master's in counselling and psychotherapy, not to be a counsellor or psychotherapist, just to understand more about what happened and why. So it was, if it came to I did become a counsellor, that's fine, but I wasn't doing it for that purpose. The reason was to understand more about mental health and how I could assist others and so on. So I did that part-time over 4 years, and that did shift a lot of my thinking. I think that, combined with the therapy that I was getting, gave me a greater understanding. And it took me a long time. I kept looking through things of a police, like my own experience all of the time. It took me a long time to shift my thinking out of that to, well, there are other ways that you can make $1. There's other things that you can do. And, not everything is as unfair as you think it might be.
And you went through the disciplinary hearing and were sacked?
No. So I got to the discipline hearing after 12 months. I got 2 weeks' notice to prepare for my discipline hearing. Went to the hearing, wanted to represent myself, my intention after all that had happened was to say that I'll go back as a uniformed sergeant in welfare and teach people about how to look after themselves, which I thought was a great idea. Hearing officer didn't agree. And really, it got adjourned for a week for the finding, and it was made very clear, if you get notified that welfare are going to your final hearing, you're getting the sack. And I was notified of that, so I resigned. And they allowed me to resign. So
you kept a journal, you did the academics side of things, and you've written a book.
Yes. Yeah, The Invisible Obvious came about, again, through my clinician. He was very keen on me because I'd written the journal, and I think he wanted me to, I didn't read it for 5 years, so I kept it until I got back to work. So I was off work for 15 months, resigned after about 14 months, and then I landed a job at Beyond Blue where I was a national engagement manager for their police and emergency services program. So if you want to talk about completely different workplace cultures, that's it. But they're not running out to a homicide or a serious assault or any of those things, so understandably. But it was a great work environment. They really encouraged me. I went in and told my story at the interview and said, this is what you're taking on, this is where I've been, this is where I want to get to. And to their eternal credit, they took me on and looked after me really well, gave me a lot of confidence that I could get back. And I was there for a year and then went back to the Police Association as a wellbeing manager, and for 4.5 years dealt with people in the same sort of state that I was in, or different stages along that state. And it was probably that really, when I was thinking about writing a book, that it became so obvious to me that I wasn't the only one, that there were so many out there that would benefit from understanding that I'm not alone and there are pathways through. And more importantly, that PTSD isn't a life sentence, that with good treatment and, putting work in, not everyone, but you can get back. You can get back to a level of functioning and a level of, you can get back to work. You can do things outside of policing. So for me,
the key is to get it early.
Well, mine was, pretty late. It had built up for a long time. The key is absolutely to get it early and to be intervening before you get anywhere near where I was like. And, we've got really good data that supports that, that shows through some of the programs we're running now that the earlier we can get good treatment, evidence-based treatments into people, the greater chance we have of them either remaining at work or transitioning out to other work, whilst they're well.
You were saying that it's not just a matter of recognising signs, but that people, and it's not just police, but people should basically have a plan.
Yeah.
So when they're well,
yes,
should be thinking, what if there is a major trauma in my life? What if this happens? What am I going to do?
Yeah, and I think that's the whole thing, the title of the book, The Invisible Obvious, because it was clear internally that I wasn't functioning well, but I made it invisible. I chose to make that invisible so no one would ever find out. I did all sorts, went to extraordinary lengths to make sure others wouldn't see that I was an alcoholic or that, I had suicidal thoughts, all those sorts of things. So if I'd had a plan, perhaps I would have had some other people around me that I could share that with and reduce that risk. So, my plan now is really, there's some basic things around diet and sleep and exercise and connecting with family, but I also have, a really strong group of people that I talk to, daily, ex-members or former colleagues or mentors from Beyond Blue or family, because the people we talk to about traumatic events at work are different to the people I talk to if my dad died. So you can't just rely on one person and say, that's my plan, I'm going to speak to them. Yeah, you need that broad group. And
you were talking, particularly when at the Police Association, you being able to talk to members, or even now to recruits. I know in the area of police shootings, and I'm sure you have, dealt with members who've shot somebody, and certainly years ago, the psychologist that they were seeing, they weren't sharing because what would you know? You've never dealt with it. So there's a group of police who've been involved in fatal shootings who, as soon as there's a shooting, they reach out and sit down and say, look, we've all been there where you are, and I'll tell you what's going to happen. You're full of adrenaline at the moment, but I'll tell you what's going to happen. You're going to react badly to loud noises. You're going to yell at your kids at the wrong time. You're going to have night sweats, and these things are going to come along. And don't for a moment think that you're unique or that you're unraveling. You will get through that.
Yep.
And they actually take advice from people who've been there.
Yeah.
So for you to be able to say X, Y, and Z, well, you've been there.
So I work at Phoenix Australia now and run a project called Responder Assist, but part of that is the clinicians we engage all do a cultural competency course on policing, and they basically only deal with police and emergency service workers. And part of that is if somebody comes in and starts talking about, I work at the dogs, they know it's not the dog squad. They know they're working in a surveillance unit. They know some of the lingo. They understand the systems around work cover and pensions and all those discipline and things like that. So it's a far more appealing place to go to. And because we stand outside the organisations, we're independent and confidential, so that, we know 30% of emergency workers openly state they'll never tell their employer.
And why?
For fear of losing their job.
Yeah.
And stigma, yeah.
And what people outside don't understand is at moments when you were really struggling, you had work.
Yes.
Work defined you. So you go and put your hand up. Well, this is the fear. You put your hand up and say, I'm not coping. Well, you're not going to be allowed to have a firearm. And if you can't have a firearm, you're not operational.
Absolutely.
So where's the incentive?
So if we've reached this sort of really uncomfortable area where you're either well or you're unwell and there's no in between, where you can either operational or you're not, and we can't support anything in between. That's a little bit harsh, but return to work, particularly in the workers' comp scheme, it's just in policing in particular. It's so hard because if you go back and show you have a capacity, you're not eligible for a pension if you return to work because you've got a capacity to work. Yeah, so it has to be I'm unwell and I'm out, or I push on and get even more injured.
But your example is that you can right the ship, and you said it was problematic with your family at one point, but you've come through that now.
Yes, and I think what you touched on before about planning when you're well and having that really broad support base around you and then educating yourself. So if you think about it, I was in the highest risk industry for a mental health injury and working in the highest risk areas and did nothing to look after mental health. Not a thing. Just suck it up, keep going. All the wrong things, drink, don't sleep, all the things I shouldn't do, without enough insight to step back and say, well, this is only going one way. This is going to end badly. So if I had a plan that there were checks and balances and I could review and reflect on where I was at, I might have had some chance of, reaching out earlier, getting a mentor who can give me good advice, finding a clinician I could trust. But it's too late to try and do that planning when you're in crisis. It's really hard to make any good decisions when we're in crisis and you're just looking for somebody to tell you where to go.
Tim, thanks for coming in.
Been a pleasure.
If the content raises any issues for you, you can call Lifeline on 131114 and reach out to a friend. This episode is reported by me and produced by a jet, Julia Carr-Katzel, mixing by the ever-reliable Cormac Lally, who starred, I may add, in an old Tooheys dry ad. Look it up, it's worth it. And our chief button pusher, of course, is Tammy Mills. Thanks to Tom McKendrick and Lisa Muxworthy. And as we say, there's a touch of evil in all of us. Good night and pleasant dreams.